So Pilates originated in Europe by a man named Joseph Pilates. It wasn't exercise in the way that we're thinking of it today, which is like, I want long, lean muscles and I want to lose weight or whatever it is that people want to do. It was literally to rehabilitate injured soldiers. But the idea was rooted really in what we would kind of call more of a rehab methodology. And it was never called Pilates back in those days. It was called contrology. I became the kind of practitioner that I was seeking and would seek and that I needed myself. And I think that that's always a great thing in a practitioner because it's somebody who really relates to the problem and has gone out and found the solution, credentialed, got experience, and really can understand what it's all like. That was the turning point for me. It was doing this sequence of activities that no doctor and no practitioner said would even work. There was actually a Supreme Court of the US lawsuit that made Pilates more available to the public, and that's why it kind of exploded out of nowhere. The focus of yoga is mobility at your joint. The focus of Pilates is stability at the joint. So in yoga, it's more of an opening concept. In Pilates, it's more of a strengthening concept. Pilates fundamentally is a functional fitness pool of work. It is a system of movement. And if you're not actually implementing the underlying principles of that system, you're not doing Pilates at all. You're just doing choreography, which is what a lot of people are doing. They're doing a lot of choreography, but not actually getting into the awareness and the function of why we're doing it.
The following podcast is for entertainment purposes only and does not constitute medical advice or opinion. Audience discretion is advised. Welcome everybody to another episode of the Health King's Court, ancient wisdom for modern health. I have a very, very wonderful guest with me today. She is the founder of My Body Couture, a one-on-one private movement studio. She's a trauma-sensitive movement specialist who focuses on providing customized and personalized body-focused services to clients that have chronic pain, illness, injuries, or other movement limitations. She's a leader in approaching mental health and wellness from a body-first lens, with trauma credentials that include, oh God, I hope I pronounce these properly. Gabor Mate Compassionate Inquiry, Bessel van der Kolk's Trauma Center, Trauma Sensitive Yoga, and Peter Levine's Somatic Experiencing, where she currently is a candidate. Some of her exercise, bodywork, and movement certifications include STOTT Pilates, Yamuna Body Rolling, Paul Grilley Yin Yoga, Leslie Kaminoff Yoga, and Critical Alignment Yoga and Therapy. She has additional designations from Precision Nutrition and the Institute of Integrative Nutrition, and she's completed coursework in Forest Yoga, Functional Synergy, and Eat, Breathe, Thrive. She's known for a whole body approach to movement, focusing on addressing the root cause of limitations and aesthetic concerns. Her practical, functional, and discipline agnostic approach blends physical and evidence-based mental health modalities into a relatable, innovative, and effective body sustainability program. And this approach offers clients the education and usable tools. She's changed thousands of people's lives and how they've related to their experience in their own bodies. She's an award-winning writer for the Elephant Journal and has been quoted in many communications such as Reader's Digest, Prevention, Women's Health, Cosmopolitan, The Working Mother, Sparks People, MyFitnessPal, and Beach Body. She's a professional teacher training others to make movement professionals gain their certifications and help other studios in adding new modalities to the program. Also, she is a mother and passionate about helping her community. And she volunteers with the Calgary Stampede, the 17th Avenue Business District, and the Heritage Park and Kids Up Front. Also, having a bachelor's degree in the University of Alberta, it is my pleasure to introduce Janis Isaman. Janis, thank you very much for coming on the show. Welcome.
Thank you so very much.
You have a lot of things that you've done and that you do, and I'm very excited to dive into as many of them as we can. So awesome. Let's dive right on into the movement and the body and the yoga and all those things that I couldn't pronounce. Who knew that there was so much to moving our body and even to yoga? What let's get it from the beginning. Why are you doing this work? What brought you into the area of
Ooh.
moving?
I mean, too, there was a lot of stuff, and I guess I'll just make this one a really short answer. I do what I was looking for at a time when I had a need. So I started really with my body, and then it's evolved over time as I have changed and as my clients' needs have changed. But I became the kind of practitioner that I was seeking and would seek, and that I needed myself. And I think that that's always a great thing in a practitioner, because it's somebody who really relates to the problem and has gone out and found the solution, credentialed, got experience, and really can understand what it's all like.
Absolutely. And that's beautiful. And I think that's a common story that's heard from a lot of healers and a lot of people in a healing modality, because once we break the cycle of not knowing for ourselves, how could we not want to help others do the same? And it does become such a calling. That's beautiful. And so would you like to share what brought you to being in a position where you were seeking this information and didn't yet have someone to help you with it?
So I really started, this was a long time ago in my life. It started because I was actually a teenager and I started running. I don't have a strong history in movement and sports. So I was not a sporty or athletic kid. I didn't really like any of it. And to this day, if you kind of throw a ball at me, it might hit the ground behind me as opposed to me rallying it back. So I went away to university and I started running, which was the first thing that I'd ever kind of liked on its own. But in fairly short order, I had a condition that's called runner's knee. And so the doctor was able to diagnose that, which was great. But then it was the age old problem of, okay, now what do we do about it? And so it really set off what became a lifelong project. I didn't know it at the time, but I hear a lot of my clients come to me with the same story. I would go to a practitioner and either it did nothing or I would get some temporary relief from it. So I, go to the massage therapist and it would feel better. And then I would go for a run or go sit and study and my knee pain would come back. And so I kept seeking solutions, and I don't even think it's actually true, but I've always kind of felt like my body manages to be more difficult than other people's, because I'm like, well, I don't see other people around me having this problem. So I really kept looking, and I went to all kinds of different practitioners. That's now a story that I get a lot of folks in my space who have the same thing that they tell me. If we on the planet had known then what we know now, this problem would have taken almost no time at all to solve, because subsequently researchers at the University of Calgary discovered that runner's knee is actually caused up at the hip. So, ultimately it came down to strengthening the hip muscles, but I didn't know that at the time. And actually neither did anybody else. So I was on this kind of circle to find a solution, and that became kind of the starting point of the whole story.
Yeah, it certainly highlights the silliness of trying to spot treat our approach to a health. Nothing is going on in a vacuum, whether it's in our body or in the world around us at large. Everything works the same. If you were trying to fix problem A, you have to address contributing factor A, B, C, and D.
Yeah.
And only in doing all of those things and addressing all of those things can we ever hope to get a real solution rather than a Band-Aid to problem A. And, especially when we get into the complex systems of our body, the physics that we have going on in our machines that we call bodies are so carefully balanced and designed. And when one area is askew or off and not operating like it's intended to, it's going to throw off a cascade of other issues where unless we're conscious to how the body operates at that meta level, we're going to only see the symptom instead of understanding, the root is actually over here. And so what ultimately was the turning point of going from perhaps traditional or conventional, rather, practitioners or healers or doctors and kind of getting their Band-Aid-like approaches to, oh, wait, I do have to address the hip. to address the knee. What opened your mind to that?
It actually was Pilates. So back in the day when I was going through this myself, Pilates was not popular. It was not even something that most people had heard of. I happened to live in a city where there was a studio, but this was a time in space and on the planet where like you had to live in a pretty major city for there even to be a Pilates studio, and they looked quite different than what they are now. There's a whole bunch of reasons for that are kind of beyond the depths that we need to get into. But it was immediately something that my body was like, whoa, I've never experienced any sensation like this. And I was using Pilates reformers. And so inadvertently, again, I mean, the trainer and the instructor wasn't able to say to me, oh, hey, this is strengthening your hip, which is why your pain is resolving. But it did the job. And my body actually felt better than it ever had in my whole life. So that was a strong connecting point. At that time, however, the only place to go and become a Pilates instructor was New Mexico. I live in Canada. I'm like, I don't even 100% know where New Mexico is. And, I was a university student. Like I couldn't just drop my studies in my life and dive off to the US to go and do a Pilates training. So I kind of filed that in the back of my mind, and my life brought it back up to the surface about a decade later, where I did do my training, because at that point Pilates had actually opened up, and there was actually a Supreme Court of the US lawsuit that made Pilates more available to the public. And that's why it kind of exploded out of nowhere. But, that was the turning point for me. It was doing this sequence of activities that no doctor and no practitioner said would even work. But in my body, it's precisely what you said. It's that kind of systems approach where everything actually had a chance to kind of work in synergy. And I actually have never had knee pain since.
That's amazing. That's beautiful. And you've brought up an interesting element of the discussion at large, in that Pilates in its origin, and I don't even know what that is or where it comes from, and we could go into that, but like Pilates is an example of perhaps an art, if you will, or a practice, if you will, that has deep and meaningful and very powerful roots and practices at its core of its philosophy and things that it includes. However, in the modern world that we live in, it's one of those terms that's been so watered down by all these people saying this Pilates, that Pilates, this Pilates.
It's true.
Even your introduction to it was with an instructor that couldn't necessarily tell you all the benefits that you were getting, or didn't necessarily understand all the behind the scenes of what they were even instructing people to do, which is certainly not the opposite. All right. Welcome back to our episode with Janis here. If you're listening to this or watching this, you might not know, but you're actually hearing us, a month or two later? Because
it's been a while.
We had some technical difficulties, and they have been resolved, and scheduling has been resolved. So we are back, and we're going to pick up right where we left off. So Janis, we were talking about Pilates when we got cut off, and I was mentioning how it's such a shame that in its common iteration or modern iteration, it's been really watered down, and people kind of hear Pilates and they don't really think much of it. They just think it's some random thing that a bunch of women at the local YMCA do, and maybe it's not that essential or important or meaningful and deep, or people don't really know anything of it, rather than maybe it's lumped in with yoga or stretching, or I don't know what's going on. So let's get to the bottom of what it actually is. Can you mention where Pilates comes from in origin, either geographically or culturally, or how did it come about?
Yes. So I'm going to give a version that if you're out there Googling and fact checking, some of these may be slightly off. So it's because it's coming from my memory right now. So Pilates originated in Europe by a man named Joseph Pilates. And it's aptly named after him. And so my understanding is that it was really during the war, and the equipment that is in use today, and there's a couple of major manufacturers. So I use STOTT Pilates equipment, but we also have Balance Body, and there's some other brands. So some of them are wood and some of them are steel. But what you'll see on what's called the reformer, the frame literally looks like a bed, because the original equipment was a retrofitted hospital bed. So essentially the deeper origins of the work, it wasn't exercise in the way that we're thinking of it today, which is like, I want long, lean muscles and I want to lose weight or whatever it is that people want to do. It was literally to rehabilitate injured soldiers. There's other equipment that is slightly less in common use. It's a barrel, and that was actually a barrel. And then there's something called the Cadillac, which looks like a large frame. And again, the origins of all of these would have been items that were available during the war and available just like around, that soldiers could use. Then after the war, Joseph and his wife Clara moved to New York City. They started a small studio there. And so then we bring in what a lot of people really think of Pilates for dancing. And it was because one of their first clients was Martha Graham, the dancer. And so then we start to bring in the same underlying elements, which is, what is the function that this person needs? So Martha Graham's functional requirements are very different than an injured soldier. So then we see the work kind of bring in those dancing elements. There was, I cannot remember his name, but there was a well-known boxer that they worked with. So again, we're going to kind of then see some of that athleticism brought in. Now, what's actually important is that Pilates was a one-to-one work. So it wasn't in a gym setting. I don't even know in those years where in New York City you would have gone to, like, we didn't have fitness clubs anyways, but it wasn't around and it wasn't ever delivered in that format. So there's these, I actually find them amazing. There's these incredible archival photos of Joseph working out with his clients, and he's like a very barrel-chested German man, often wearing like Speedo kind of garment. And that's all he's wearing is he's instructing. And I'm like, whoa, that would be like levels of illegal today. Because sometimes there's at least one image where he's standing literally on a client's stomach. But the idea was rooted really in what we would kind of call more of a rehab methodology. And it was never called Pilates back in those days. It was called contrology. So that's kind of the root of it. And then there's a jump in history where Joseph died, and he had trained a teacher named Romana. And then there's some other folks that are kind of in the elders circle of Pilates, but he passed his work down. And the way that was done was that Romana worked in a studio. So we didn't have teacher trainings where you paid X number of thousands of dollars and you got a manual. You did it by way of apprenticeship, essentially. So Romana became kind of the link. The studio passed hands, and then we jumped forward into the 90s, where there were a few companies producing equipment commercially. There were a few places to take Pilates training. So when I first encountered it, I knew you could do it in New Mexico. No offense to anybody in New Mexico, but I live in Canada. I'm like, I know New Mexico's a state. I don't know where it is. I don't know. I don't know how we would get there from where I am. So even when I first encountered it, you really had to be committed to the idea of either contrology or Pilates to go and do a teacher training. The equipment was really hard to come by, et cetera. So the turning point for all of this into our really modern culture, and where you see it in every gym and you see it everywhere and it's all over the place, was actually in 1999. So the studio that Joseph had started passed to Romana, and it eventually landed in the hands of a gentleman who is still very much alive and well. His name is Sean Gallagher, and he ended up initiating a lawsuit regarding the trademark name of Pilates. And that ended up, from my understanding, all the way in the Supreme Court of the United States. And the ruling in 1999 was that the word Pilates was like yoga or Kleenex, where it was not something that could be trademarked. And that opened the floodgates. Now, that didn't happen overnight. It wasn't like, one day in 1999, Pilates was kind of these private small studios and that was really the only way to encounter it, to the next day that it was everywhere. But removing the trademark from it is what opened the floodgates to how we ended up with Pilates in every gym and every studio and everywhere. Because suddenly then people could start teaching the work. It opened the door for more businesses to start offering teacher trainings. It opened the door for more equipment companies, all of the things. So in there, there was a teacher named Moira Stott who got married and became Moira Marathu. And that is actually the genesis of STOTT Pilates, which is the world's largest global Pilates company. That's where I did my training, and they're actually based in Toronto. And she went to New York and trained with Romana. So it would have been kind of pure form Pilates, because she was an injured dancer. She brought that work back to Toronto and wanted to work with it. And she had a friend who was a physiotherapist, and the friend was like, whoa, normal people can't do this stuff. Let's kind of break it down. And so she's another really instrumental person in kind of how Pilates became popular, because she created levels to the work, and she created modifications and brought in props that weren't as available in the original work. And so then it became something that everybody could do, because the way that I can teach Pilates, you can walk in here never having exercised a day in your life, and we can bring in those Pilates concepts. I can use props. We can modify the work, the original body of work. I actually was able to take a class once with Moira where she taught it the way she learned it. And like, I was dying, and I'd been teaching Pilates for like 15 years. And I was like, oh, okay, no. I can't even do this. So she was really instrumental as well and she's not really credited with that often, but she was really instrumental in kind of bringing what we often see in a gym setting into popular culture. So that's kind of the roots of it. And I teach it a little bit more how I learned it, which is in a private setting, 1-to-1, focused on that functional component. I'm not a very good teacher. Nobody wants me to ever teach Pilates in kind of a club setting where there's like 12 or 15 people. I'm just like, whoa, because I didn't learn it that way. And it's just hard for my brain to sort of, because when you're working 1-to-1 with people, really, you're able to do a lot of the corrections where you're really engaging the core and you're really getting into those fine micro details. And my brain literally explodes if I'm trying to do that for 15 people at the same time as counting and choreography and music. And like, terrible. So I try to not be like a Pilates snot, but I end up kind of being one because I'm delivering something that's a lot closer to kind of the original studio work, where I'm not wearing a Speedo either, just to be clear.
Wow. A lot to unpack there. It's so fascinating how, I guess any industry or any field or any art or any practice will usually have some sort of backstory, but this is a very interesting one, full of politics and controversy, lawsuits and all this crazy stuff that you wouldn't really expect. I think from the background and from the origin, even, it's fascinating that it came from Europe, because I think a lot of the things that it gets lumped in with have more Asian origins and Asian descent. So it's interesting
that's true, right?
It's interesting to explore one that comes from Europe and compare and contrast. It's really interesting how it got started and how it kind of adapted over time. But I'm interested to know why you think the term Pilates was so focused on and kind of sought after when that was the one guy's name to begin with. How come they didn't run with the contrology phrase, do you think?
That I don't know. So I'm sure that if I dug into the internet, I could easily find that today, but I don't know actually why it ended up landing on Pilates instead of contrology. It may have something to do with the studio name. I don't know. Somebody out there who's listening actually might know, but I don't actually remember, or I never knew. One of the two. It's all the same.
Interesting. Yeah, maybe they just wanted the clout of the name. Like if that's how it got popular, rather than going generic, everyone just wanted to jump on that name.
Yeah, you're totally right. Actually, I never in my life have considered that, but it was very much in the 90s and 2000s, really lumped in with yoga, but in a funny way, because as somebody who's my base training is Pilates, and it was like cats across the fence at each other with the Pilates folks and the yoga folks, and never. But we were kind of the two quote unquote mind body disciplines. That terminology has kind of fallen out of favor. We talk about somatic training or mobility training today, but it's all the same roots, but where we're tuning into the body and we're making the body really, we're focused on breath and we're focused on connecting breath and body. But the way that those two systems are delivered, they always were quite different. I did end up betraying my people and getting some yoga certifications.
You went into enemy territory.
I did. And I was like, whoa, this is, and it's the kind of people that are drawn into both works. Especially when I took my Pilates training, it was mostly still dancers. It was, and then wandering over onto the yoga pathway, people with the knee-high socks and their green juices. And I was like, these are totally not the same kinds of people. I get why we have this thing, but we were the two kind of mind-body disciplines. And they were, Pilates is German and yoga is traditionally, I think there's a whole backstory there too. And there's literal entire books about the history of how we went from yoga in India to the yoga that we practice in North America today. It's very different from my understanding, but still the root is in India versus Germany. So it's a totally different route. So it's very interesting and odd how those two became bedmates accidentally in the 90s and 2000s, etc.
Yeah, very interesting. Do you find that after taking some yoga training that you are a better Pilates instructor? Like, are you able to implement certain techniques or concepts or knowledge into your practice?
That's a good question. So every training I have taken has added something, and there's a reason why I sought it out. So if I today design the quote unquote perfect exercise system based on everything I know and everything I see and everything that I think is exactly perfect, there would still be flaws and holes in the system. And that's what I would kind of see. So I think Pilates delivers functional fitness beautifully. Obviously there's, it's famous for core work for a good reason. I don't think there's anything that beats it. If you want to kind of get strong through your glutes and your abs, that's the winning pick to me. When I did go over to yoga, I think that yoga actually, honestly, to me, does a better job of things that are standing. So, you see the warrior series, you see your sun salutations, you see, a lot more things that resemble lunges and squats, and we don't call it that, but there's a lot more kind of work at the hip in ways that I don't really see in Pilates. And you'll notice that I'm talking about the functional fitness part of it. I've actually, although I'm trained to do so, I've never super been ultra comfortable with like the meditative component of yoga. And to some people, that means that I don't teach yoga and that I'm just teaching asana. And, but I really have found that there's components of yoga physically that Pilates just doesn't cover. Like one of the certifications I have is a style called yin yoga, and it's about stretching open your fascia, and you're holding postures or shapes for 5 minutes, sometimes 3, sometimes 10, but somewhere in that kind of longer region. And it's working on the connective tissue. Well, I can't do that in Pilates. That's not how that body of work is structured. I think if I wanted to have a client or even myself, if I'm like, I don't teach this way, but if somebody came to me and was like, I want to have the greatest butt that's ever been known on this planet. I actually would use the yoga movements because there's more work at the hip. A lot of Pilates is actually done laying down, and there's nothing wrong with that. But it's just, they're different systems of exercise. And again, I'm just talking about the exercise component. I think for myself, the piece that I brought in, the mind body work, I've done that more through trauma work. So I do teach a very integrated mind body technique, but the way that the meditation and the spiritual element of yoga is done. And again, this is my personal preference. I'm not saying that the system is wrong or bad. It just didn't draw me in that same way. So I haven't kind of followed that traditional pathway. I've used yoga more for the body tools, and then look to integrate the mindful components of it and the interoception piece of it from other bodies of work as well. So I'm kind of still brewing the pot of where I'm getting everything from. And that's not going to be every yoga instructor. But the answer to all of that is yes, it did make me a better instructor, because I think that every time you're adding to the toolkit, it gives you different tools. And then, as I just said, I mean, I think that I have met maybe one or two other people that have very similar trainings to me, like almost identical. And the way that they're putting it together is different, because how they do the work themselves, different elements speak to them differently, right? So even if you photocopied my resume and did exactly the same trainings, you might have a different relationship to something like meditation or the spirituality elements of yoga. And it's not wrong, it's not right. It's what you're getting through every instructor is kind of the filter of how they're experiencing what they're learning.
Yeah, and that's a huge caveat to give, because I think so many people are medical model minded, where they will equate an art form or a practice or whatever name or phrase practiced or purported or spoken about by one person with everyone else and just group everyone in. And that's just not how it is. It's not. Here's the book. Every instructor is just going to open the book and read you the same passage like you get in conventional medicine these days. It's a conglomeration of that healer or that practitioner's experiences within that industry, within that field, within that art, within the adjacent or a complementary arts that they know and have explored, and how they kind of process it and how they connect on a human level with their patients. Like, it's so personal, the world of holistic healing. And it's such an important differentiation to make for people, because I think a lot of people out there perhaps have a not so fantastic taste in their mouths towards things like either Pilates or yoga or all these other things. And then they just write off the whole thing.
I agree. And the way that I teach it is not for everybody either, because you're fundamentally, to be one of my clients, you're whether you think you are or not, like you're buying my personality and my experiences and my life story along with it, because there is no other filter that I have. I'm not just spitting back pages from the manuals. And no teacher is. So, it's really, I've been lucky enough to train with a number of different teachers and organizations that really, really, really focus on do the work yourself. So, because when you get into this world, it's not about an exam that you took. Some of them do have exams, some of them don't, but it's not about the exam. It's not about the book knowledge. It's not about the manual. And again, some of these courses have incredible manuals that are amazing, and some of them have no manuals at all. So, it just, but the common thread between most of them, it's not 100%, but most really focus on you as a future teacher, practitioner, facilitator, whatever word they're going to use. The first whole part of the course is you do this yourself, so that it's not a theoretical body of knowledge. It's not going to a school and filling your brain with concepts. Those things are good. And, I'm a person who has a degree. I love education, like, a lot, but, I could read a book about how to be fit, and I could know a lot about the theories of how to be fit. That's not the same thing as exercising, right? And then taking it that one step further, my experience of, okay, I read the book, I learned how to be fit. Now I am fit. Now, how do I describe that experience of how to get there to someone else? So how do you teach it? And it has to come through the human being. And especially in this world where we've been given, I was going to say permission, but that's how this is structured. You know, if you go into a gym, whether you know it or not, you're buying that, the instructor's entire relationship with their body for their whole life. And so many times what I get for client base, because I have a story where I wasn't athletic and I had to work at it and it doesn't come naturally to me. None of it does. I don't tend to get clients who came in and are like, you know, I was the captain of the cheerleading team. I do have a few, but this always came naturally to me, and I can watch you do something and do it perfectly. Those folks tend to be with other instructors who have more of that similar common experience. Now, I've worked with people I've worked actually with two people that are Olympic medalists of some kind or another. Like, clearly, I don't have to relate identically to every single experience, but I do very much teach, and my teaching style is totally informed by my whole life experience and how I've actually related to every single exercise that I teach. Because actually the structure of how those teacher trainings, and I can't think of a single one that isn't, but it's in the manual or it's somewhere. You watch it, you read it, then you do it. So there isn't a single exercise, whether I was good at it, bad at it, et cetera, that I haven't at least attempted on some. Some of them were attempts, not actually. But I've had to actually try to put my body into that shape or do the thing at least once. Now, I do actually have exercises that for my body are great. I do them regularly, et cetera. But there's other ones where I'm like, oh yeah, that's going to injure me. So I'm going to do an attempt, and that's the end of it. But everything is coming through my lens, my experiences, the sensations in my bodies, et cetera. So you make a great point. Like, if you have tried Pilates, you've tried one instructor. And at this point in history, I mean, 1999 was a minute ago now. So we also have different teaching schools. I mean, when I did it, my training, when I added up the hours, was 800 hours. Well, there are now trainings that are, I don't know what the shortest one is, but like you could easily train to become a Pilates instructor in a weekend, because there's franchise models now where you're not learning kind of the whole underpinning. You're not. And so, you know, there are people that I get in here that think that they've taken Pilates, which they have. It's the same word.
Yeah.
But it's totally different. Like, the instructor did a franchise model training, and I have like an 800-hour training. It's not going to be the same experience, right?
Yeah. How about in your personal life? Like, do you ever tell people about what you do, and like either your friends or family, like they kind of like don't take it seriously? They're like, oh yeah, you know, Janis is doing that. When is she going to get when is she going to get a real job, you know?
So that doesn't happen anymore, because I mean, I opened a bricks and mortar studio like 10 or 11 years ago. So I think that actually after that, there was still like slight skepticism, but not by everybody, of course, but I think after a while, it's just a thing I do, and I'm clearly not going to go back to doing other things. But yeah, I think that sometimes there is slight skepticism of people who are like Pilates or yoga instructors. The only thing that I still find funny is sometimes people think that I must have like a wealthy husband somewhere that's like, you know, actually doing this because I have this like play job. And I'm like, well,
yeah.
That's not
exactly.
happening.
That's my question. You know, like you face like stigma from doing what you're doing, even if you're doing it fantastically well, because in people's eyes, just like the art form doesn't necessarily get taken seriously, the practitioners don't as well. It's like, how is that kind of, you know, I was wondering Like
one of the things that I've tried to really do is and I'm overt about it. So some people in my cohort and network actually know about this, but I really often compare myself to what would another professional do. So like fitness professionals often don't call ourselves professionals. We're like teachers or instructors or other words like that. We often will get asked to do a lot of free things. So, you can teach for exposure and like, great. But like, I've been teaching for 18 years. I'm pretty exposed. Thank you. But what I actually do is I'll compare myself to a lawyer, a dentist, things like that. When I ask myself the question, would a lawyer do this? Like, I will often get questions like, hey, can I come in for a consult? And then they expect a full hour session for free as a consult. And like, I don't get to go to my dentist and be like, hey, can you fill a tooth? And then I can decide if I want to like use you as a dentist. Yeah. I don't go to a lawyer and have them do up a contract and then use that to kind of evaluate their work. So I'm constantly kind of doing that, where if I'm asked to do something, especially if it's not compensated, I'm making that comparison. And then I try to run my practice that way. So I am in a commercial space. I am just trying to actually elevate it to really like, it is a profession. I have to actually not every certification, but some of the certifications I have to do the same thing that other professions do that are regulated. Fitness, unfortunately, kind of isn't. We don't have like a regulatory body. But some of the certifications require us to do continuing education. I have one where I have to actually like fully recertify every 2 years, including like doing the practical component of it, things like that. So I try to mirror that model as much as I can. Obviously, there's some things like lawyers and dentists actually do have regulatory bodies, and I actually, frankly, wish we did, because there are ways in which certain people in our industry kind of give everybody a bad rap because we don't like. And what regulatory bodies do is set standards about how long trainings are. For example, when you have to do your continuing education, insurance things. I always have insurance. I have $5 million of liability insurance, things like that other professions have because they're professions. They're not kind of side hustles or jobs that you do to fill time while you're parenting. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
That's what I try to do. But yeah, there is still some, it came to my attention recently, like a lot of people at this point in my life, because it's not like I bring it up every day, although I did mention it earlier on this podcast. But, I have a university degree, like I have a full bachelor's degree. So like sometimes I was like, oh, weird. People just think that I like went and did like a couple courses, and that some of those misconceptions are a bit odd because I don't even know where they come from.
Yeah, it's interesting, the eternal plight of the holistic healer, right?
Yes,
it's like, how do we integrate into this modern corporate capitalistic world that old school human to human arts, right? It's like it's a weird meshing. And unfortunately,
it is.
A lot of practitioners don't quite find a healthy balance at the detriment of themselves, their practice, and then their art form altogether, right? And I think a lot of people do kind of overgive or allow the pressure of the general common folk of asking for those things and, like giving it to them and giving an inch and then having a mile taken from you. It's
I've done all these things. I've done all the things. One of the things I did decide to do, actually, and if I was going to kind of offer something that I think that I've done and done well, is I used to go to a yoga studio, and I remember being in the change room and just being aware, like the entire wall was papered with ways to get a discount. So there was, if you sign up for this 21-day challenge, it's only this amount, and your regular membership would be that amount. Or if you sign up in June, you get to save whatever. Or, there was like 6 or 7 different offers.
It's like you're always begging to like have people purchase your things. Like, oh no, I'll give you a discount if you come here. I'll give you a discount. And it's like, it cheapens the whole thing.
Right. And I was like, you know what? I can't remember at that point how many certifications I had, but like when I moved here and opened, I had 3. So let's say 5. And I'm like, these certifications are actually, it's a lot of time. It's a lot of money. And none of that changes when I offer my client a package discount. Well, if you buy 10, you can save $15 an hour. So now I've knocked a ton of money off that person's thing to incentivize them. But what am I getting at? Right? Yeah. All I'm doing is actually then resenting that person for the fact that I'm not actually billing them out properly. Yeah. So when I opened, I decided that I would give no price breaks other than if you refer a friend, I will give you and the friend a discount for like a friends and family rate. And I have held to that without any compromise at all of any type ever since I opened. And that would be the one thing that I'm like, I did that well, because I am able to give my clients who refer in a thank you gift.
Yeah.
Which is different than this June, if you sign up for 10, you get to save money, because by the time they've redeemed all of that 2.5 months in, I'm just like, okay, I'm exhausting myself to roll through volume when what I'm really after is being a subject matter expert, being a resource for clients, being helpful, and a lot of that does take training, education, certifications. That stuff takes time. It takes money. It takes a certain level of standard. And I don't want to compromise on that. So
you're not going to find Janis on Groupon. Sorry.
You are not.
But, that's, kudos to you. Good for you, because you probably have maintained a higher caliber of patient or client or whatever, whatever terminology you use, people that come in your doors, which then in turn doesn't burn you out, which in turn allows you to keep doing what you do rather than dealing with all the ridiculousness that comes from cheap clients. That's
yeah, that's right. And I noticed for sure, because I am working mostly one-to-one with people, there is a tap out on my daily energy. That one is another kind of common misconception, like, oh, well, wouldn't you want to bill out 40 hours a week? Actually, I don't, because when I bill out 40 hours a week, I'm not fully there. And like different people have different capacities, but I remember reading somebody who does what I do, the sustainable maximum is about 15 hours a week. And that's probably pretty darn close to where I run at most times. Sometimes I'm a little over, sometimes I'm a little under, but, and I remember reading that because I was like, that's crazy. But I get that one a lot. Like people think that it's a part-time job, and I'm like, that is actually super full-time. And if I have 7 clients in a day, I go home and I'm just like so tired. I don't have energy to give to my own life. I don't have energy I start dreading, the next morning I do this all again. So I'm not even fully present energetically for my clients. That's why I require them to pay for their time. And as soon as you get into discounting models, then you have to run more volume. And I literally can't.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. So shifting gears a little bit back to the more the structure of what Pilates is. You mentioned in its origin story, first it was equipment adapted from a hospital bed. You mentioned there's equipment made of wood and steel, and a lot of it's done lying down. The image that comes to my mind when I think Pilates is like someone laying down on like the thing with their legs on the thing that slides up and down. So does all Pilates involve equipment? And is that like a main differentiation between that and like, let's say yoga, or is some of it just body movements, or is it like heavily equipment focused? What's going on there?
That's a super good question. So it can be. So that kind of break in 1999, the first kind of thing that was spread wide open, I would say, was actually mat classes. So in every little gym everywhere for a while, you could find a Pilates mat class. So that is going to look more like a yoga, where sometimes there's props, but usually not. And you're on the floor. You might be doing some standing work, but it's going to look more like a yoga class in its structure. Like you have a mat on the floor, you're engaging with your body weight, and that's kind of that. And so how those yoga and Pilates kind of differentiate from one another on an anatomical level. The focus of yoga is mobility at your joint. The focus of Pilates is stability at the joint. So in yoga, it's more of an opening concept. In Pilates, it's more of a strengthening concept. And then in the mat work, really the focus is going to be abdominals. And so that's the other way that I would kind of describe that difference. In Pilates, the core is king. In yoga, the feet typically are the king. So it's kind of like, where is the base of your body? And in Pilates, I can't help myself. And I tell my clients, I'm like, I just, no matter how many trainings I do, like the core bias that I have is strong. So I think that, you're standing, you're sitting, everything ends up passing through the core. So if we have no core strength, something's got to give. Like you're going to end up in your shoulders hunched forward, or you're going to end up with pain somewhere else in your body because it has to kind of go somewhere else.
Interesting.
Typically, if you go into, and not every style of yoga is like this, but typically if you go into yoga, there's a lot more focus on planting the feet on the ground, and kind of that's the root structure. So it's a philosophical difference there as well. So I will tend to bias towards abs, and I can't help myself. And I fully tell my clients, I'm like, this is my base training from which everything else is built. So, and I don't ever get clients that are like, I don't want to work on my core. so it kind of works out, but so although both schools of work now have a lot of exercises, there are philosophy differences in what makes a Pilates exercise. It's going to be strengthening your joints. It's really focused on what's happening at the joints. It's not as focused on kind of the big movement, big muscles that move you. It's going to be the ones that are found around your joints, and that includes your spine.
Very interesting. The kind of center out versus the bottom up approach is a really interesting one to consider in like the behind the scenes mindset and philosophy of both practices. And so I imagine that's why the types of people that Pilates was kind of designed around gravitated towards it, or that kind of popularized it. Like you said, it was rehabilitation for the soldiers whose bodies are getting beaten up, but then they have to get strong again. It's the dancer whose, joints are absolutely pivotal and extremely important to be strong in order to do the certain positions.
That's right.
That it was like the boxer, the fighter. Now, is there other kind of common cohorts of types of people that take advantage of Pilates, but like besides the dancers and the fighters? Are those kind of like the...
There are lots of athletes. And at this point, I think, again, what we kind of saw really shifting in the 90s was the idea of the core, and I put that in quotation marks, for everyday people. But the reality is most of my clients are either current or former desk jockeys. Now, to be fair, that is really the average person's life at this point. So it's not, I would call that a cohort, but I would and wouldn't, you know what I mean? Because it's the cohort of everyone.
Yeah. And what do you think is the, like the state of the average person's core?
Oh boy. So I actually personally think that there's kind of common threads behind everybody that's sitting at a desk. So we're sitting with our legs bent, forward facing position. There's a lot of compression on the hip joint. So typically, I'm about to say a word that I don't think would have been in the common lexicon decades ago, but hip flexors. Those are typically tight. So I'll take the time to kind of get out the skeleton and an anatomy model and explain, the hip flexor is actually two muscles. Here it is. This is why it is causing kind of that compressed feeling. We'll open that up for people. We typically have low tone glutes and low tone abdominals. And it's just because like you're sitting in a chair, you can kind of slump here. You don't need any abdominal muscles. You don't need any glute muscles versus standing. It's not going to be at 100% muscle engagement. It's not like lifting weights, but you cannot stand without using a little bit of tone in that area.
Yeah.
So I see a lot of very repetitive issues in people's bodies. And it's because, I think a couple of weeks ago, I saw the number on how many hours a day the average person sits, and something like 14, 15, somewhere in there. Like it's a lot. So we can't do that without having some kind of impact on the body. I'm working with a mostly adult populace, but I have a teenage group that I work with that are all athletes. So I laugh, I have a child that's around the same age, and I totally get it. It's like the kind of athlete whose mom has taken them to physio like endlessly, and they're like, okay, we gotta put a stop to this. So, I'm getting different gymnasts, ballet dancers, hockey players, different kids from different, because we're actually pushing our kid athletes in the same way that we dialed back to the 80s. They're kids now as teenagers are doing things that literal Olympic athletes were doing in the 80s. So it's just really hard on their body, and lots of kids get injured in a more long-term sense from that. So stuff like Pilates will really help with that. And
so, yeah, I mean, the body's definitely use it or lose it, right? If you're just sitting in a chair, especially if you're poor postured, obviously different elements of your body are going to atrophy over time. But what are some like implementations or actionables that even the average person can do in their everyday life, implementing Pilates philosophy or movements? Like, is it something that can be taken with you into everyday practice? Like, as you're standing, do this. As you're sitting, do that. Like, what are some implementable, like?
So I think the biggest thing that comes out of a discipline like Pilates is actually the awareness of what things feel like. And what tends to happen is I work with somebody, and the amount of time this takes varies quite dramatically, but it's somewhere between like 2 days, and I had a guy that took 10 years. So I was going to say 2 years, but like it could be a decade. I always tell my clients, you have everybody mathematically has 168 hours in a week. That's just how the math works. So if you're in here for an hour or even 2, that leaves you with 166 to 167 hours that you are not with me. And what I actually care about is giving people the information in their body and in their brain that they can take out and do that. So I always actually preference I preference clients who actually have their own thing going on outside of this. That could be anything. I right before you hopped on here, I had a 72-year-old client that does an online workout program, and she came to me because she's like, I'm doing the thing, but I'm getting nothing out of doing it. And so we've literally taken that online program, and I've Pilates-sized it for her in terms of what is the function of this? What are we supposed to be working? And then how do we tweak it slightly so that you can still do this program, but actually feel what you're supposed to be feeling? And she's just like blown away, because it's small things that she can do and just be aware of, like, okay, if you're doing a leg raise, the goal of that exercise is your abs. Are you feeling your abs? And she's like, no, I just feel it in my shoulders. I'm like, okay. So then we just make some changes to it, and then she's able to take that out. So that's somebody who's doing other workout programs. I love those folks. Then I get people who don't do anything outside of here in terms of other workouts. That's great too, because you probably sit and stand, you walk, you do some functional things. Like if you're actually got to the door of my studio, you had to walk up some stairs and you had to walk from your car. Okay. So let's use those as our base. So focusing on kind of the sensations of the hips, what your posture feels like. And a big piece of it is just drawing their attention to, what does that feel like right now? What does that feel like versus before you did the exercise? What does that feel like before you did the workout? And then kind of, there's some tips about moving and tips about how things could feel, but then they can start to, most of my clients will come in here somewhere between 2 days and 10 years later and be like, oh, I was taking a walk and I noticed, insert thing that we had talked about. And I noticed that my glutes were working, or I noticed that. And then that's when we can actually start to self-regulate some of those shifts and changes. So the way that the fitness model in a traditional sense is set up, you do the thing in the space and then you leave, and then that's that, right? And then you have to come back tomorrow and do the thing again. And like, I think that everybody should be doing some kind of movement or exercise every day. So it's not that I'm against people returning to a gym, but you don't really get along with that, any anatomy, you don't get any biomechanical information, you don't get any cueing about how sensations could or might feel. So how are you supposed to know if something's too tight? How are you supposed to know if something's actually a chronic injury or even illness? I mean, I've had clients that I've literally referred to doctors because I'm like, this is something that you should be going outside of like the fitness world for, right? If you actually have no awareness of what a movement could feel like or should feel like, how would you know how to do anything about it? You don't. So that's, I think, kind of one of my biggest pieces of work, because Pilates fundamentally is a functional fitness pool of work. And even from the very outset, what I kind of shared with the history of it, none of those clients started and stopped with Pilates. Like, it was never meant to be like, here's a whole system that's the only thing that matters in your life. Like, it was to get the soldiers back on the field. It was to get the dancer on the stage. It was to get the boxer in the ring. And so that component for me to this day lives very large. Like, it doesn't matter to me if the only thing somebody does is walks their dog or walks up the stairs once a week to meet me. They still have to be able to do it, right? So like, I really work a lot on whatever somebody's doing outside of the space is what we're kind of trying to build on and get them that body awareness and get them kind of some of that information that they probably never learned outside of like high school biology when they were sleeping or passing notes or tossing gum under the desk and seeing if it would stick there. And really bringing that to life in a way that like, okay, yes, this is the skeleton, these are the muscles and the bones, but this is how it functions, and this is how it's functioning in your body. And how do we make that kind of a cohesive piece of why you care about this information? And it turns out most people care a lot when it actually comes to something they can use in that level of practical knowledge, right?
Yeah, that's beautiful, because ultimately what you're advocating for is just conscious existence, being aware of your body, being connected with your body. And it's so amazing how in the modern Western world, especially, people have no concept of what the hell is going on, like behind their eyeballs and like in their whole body. Like it's amazing how people are existing in such a way. Like you said, Pilates is a matter of functional fitness, and most people aren't at all functional, and they aren't at all fit, and they don't at all think about it.
Totally.
Like they don't think about how they're doing anything. They're just kind of existing and just like going, and
I find that this system of movement literally comes to every movement that you do. Every movement.
100%.
So it doesn't matter if you're in a spin class. It doesn't matter if you're in a traditional aerobics class or what have you at the gym. It doesn't matter if you're sitting on your couch. It is a system of movement. And if you're not actually implementing the underlying principles of that system, you're not doing Pilates at all. You're just doing choreography, which is what a lot of people are doing. They're doing a lot of choreography, but not actually getting into the awareness and the function of why we're doing it. And I just would ask, like, I don't ask my clients, but I should, if you're doing that, why are you doing it? Because there should be a why behind everything you're doing. I mean, at the end of the day, most of us work because we get paid, and we want to get paid because that's how we buy things. And that's the only way that we can buy produce. It's the only way we can buy clothes for most of us. Some people out there have garden or sew or whatever, but those things are directly linked. people struggle to exercise when they have no idea why they're doing it.
Yeah. An astute observer can tell a lot about a person by observing how they move in any movement, whether it's how you get up from your desk, how you walk across the room, how you get into your car, how you scan your groceries. There's a massive difference in the internal world between someone who is doing all of those things in a smooth and flow-like fashion and one that's like lunking their way around the world. You know, it's certainly an indicator of, or at least a indicator to use in your total observation and
it is, and it's very subconscious. Actually, one of my favorite client stories is I had a woman that I worked with for a couple of years, and she was doing a long apartment renovation. So I think she had started it when I met her and she was finishing it when she left my practice. And when she first came to me, her posture was awful. She knew it. I knew it. It was awful. Like she couldn't really stand up straight, kind of slumpy shoulders, collapsed everywhere. It was just like, wow. And she came to me kind of towards the end, and she'd had a couple of experiences of going to this home reno store of some kind. The first time she came in, they basically ignored her. The second time she went in, it was a while later in time, and suddenly it was like amazing customer service. And I was like, I wonder if your actual literal physical body carriage of now you're upright, your shoulders are open, you're standing confidently, that completely changed your experience. And she said, yes, because it's been changing everywhere from it, you know, the bank, the airport, the office, everywhere is changed. The people engage with me more, they pay attention, they listen more when I speak. And I was like, yeah, that's a real thing. Because when we come in and our shoulders are slumped, that is communicating something to other people, even if that is our, you know, quote unquote, best posture, because our body can't do anything else. It's communicating a lot of subconscious information. And we don't want to bias against people in that way, but we do as humans. So as soon as she was, you know, standing in one line and her shoulders are open and she's making full eye contact because, you know, when your posture is crappy, you kind of look down, your neck is forward. The way the entire world related to her is different. So I love that story because it's achievable for everybody in that same way. And we don't even think about that. Like a lot of people will talk about their posture, but they don't even really think about how subconscious that communication is. I mean, there's a reason that humans have eyeballs.
Yeah, you know, we live in this time where everyone likes to purport this fallacy, this ideological nonsense that'll never actually exist in reality of don't judge, you know, don't judge someone based on how they look and blah, blah.
That's not a thing. That's not a thing. That's not a thing.
Yeah.
No.
And I love that in 2024, more people are just finally saying that that's so garbage. It's
not a thing.
Yeah. And you know what's crazy?
We have like human, that's the number one thing humans will do. The second that we see another human is we do judge them, and we're judging, are they safe? Are they, there's a whole list of things that we're judging, but we just, it's just what happens. You can't even stop it. And I actually don't think, because I do a lot of trauma work, I don't even think it's safe to stop it, because you shouldn't actually turn off your human
It's a
instinct.
survival mechanism. Yeah. It's a built-in innate thing, not just in the human species, but all species that have consciousness to observe and then form judgment and then understand what's going on in the world around you and how you can, one, preserve your own life, but then two, optimize it. Like it is what it is.
Even with aging, I think there's a lot of body signals that happen that tell other people around us how old we are. And like, frankly, I don't want to get, you know, I have a teenage human that I raise, and like, they're at the age where like body slamming is awesome, and like wrestling, grappling. I don't want someone to come up to me on the street, like body slam me, or like, you know, even playfully punch me. Whereas when you're a teenager and you kind of have all that, your physical appearance is kind of signaling how to how to engage. Like when you see an 80 or 100-year-old woman, you know, to kind of give them a little bit more space in public. And like, you know, you're not rushing past them and hitting them with your bag like you might if you're just on the subway. So there's just endless ways that kind of how our body is in the world is how other people relate to us, because they're getting all kinds of subconscious signaling about who we are and how to engage with us.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Does Pilates do anything to address pelvic tilts? Because you mentioned before the hip flexors and hip issues, et cetera. And I think one of the massive, you know, epidemic conditions or states of the body in a lot of people is pelvic tilt, particularly an anterior tilt for a lot of people. Is that something that you have experience with?
It is. So I did my training a long time ago, and I can't actually speak to how this has evolved over time, but I did my training at a time when there was a lot of conversation about like anterior, posterior, kyphotic curves of your back, et cetera. And there was a bit of a phase where it was seen like all tilting of the pelvis was bad. Well, our pelvis tilts, that's like just a thing. So the answer is yes. And I also was trained in a system of Pilates where we worked towards what's called a neutral pelvis. So that means that you're not overly tipped forward, you're not overly tipped backwards. So number one of the most important pieces, if you're going to teach that, is that you need to know what you're teaching. So like, what is anterior, what's posterior? So, you know, that's beyond this podcast. But when we sit, we do tend to kind of tilt the pelvis backwards usually. So I do have adults in my business that have a hard time with like basic back mobility. So if we're trying to tilt forward or backwards, they have a hard time. Like their muscles can't do it. I also have a set of women who in bar classes, you tuck everything. So tuck, tuck, tuck. Dancers often will tuck their pelvis. So, you know, we see really tight glutes and they often have a hard time in neutral. So what I'm about to say, again, I can't speak to exactly how that shifted out in the world. But maybe somebody who listens can fill in some of that gap. But when I trained, we had the yoga and Pilates hissing cats. We also have classical versus contemporary Pilates that were like, so at the end of it, when Joseph Pilates taught, his underlying philosophy was that since babies are born with no curves in the spine, so we don't see that lower back curve and we don't also see that neck curve, that's the optimal human condition. So we want to return to that.
Interesting.
It's a little bit like 1940s. It's kind of, you know, it sits in a body of, I can see where he came to that, but if you actually do that, you're going to end up with injuries because the adult spine, when you have an infant, actually, let's go to toddlerhood. So you know how toddlers, when they walk, it's very wide and kind of a little drunk sailor. Part of what you're watching is that lumbar or the lower back curve developing. So they're putting weight on it. And because that is flatter, taking their legs wide creates the base of stability. So they can actually literally just shift their weight because their back isn't bearing the weight the same way ours do. So that's when we get the lumbar curve. The same thing will happen with the cervical, which is your neck, that curve. Anybody who's parented in the last, 15 years, the tummy time thing with little kids. Little kids have always done tummy time where they will lay on their stomach, lift their head, and then their head bobs and weaves, and then they put it down because they're tired. That's your cervical spine curve developing. So while I can see where he kind of got that idea that like a return to nature is taking the curves out, there are actually biological kind of processes that almost all children will go through to develop those curves. Then we have them forever. So we want to so classical Pilates tucked the spine to get rid of that curve. So in classical Pilates, and again, I actually cannot speak to, I've never done a classical Pilates training. I don't know if they're still doing it actually, but the back is pressed into the mat. So I will sometimes get students who say, I used to do Pilates. I still to this day will ask them, do you know what style of Pilates you did? Because there are still styles of Pilates where you press your whole back into the mat. That's not what I did. So I came in through the contemporary pathway. Our lovely Moira Stott and her physiotherapist friend, we don't do that because biomechanically that will create injuries in adults. So we always have a curve in the spine, and we work within a neutral component, which means that it's not too much and not too little. Some people can't hold that neutral curve when they're first learning because they don't have the ab strength to do it. So we'll just put them in a tiny little tuck to help. But that's through musculature at the front, not just kind of like dropping your bones back onto the ground. So it's a bit of a loaded question, even within the Pilates world, especially kind of as you go further back, like instructors that have more of a history in the way that, we get an older instructor and these two systems were like at deep odds with each other. So I have walked backwards from some of that. Like I used to, it was actually part of our exam. Like you had to test people's pelvic tilts. Pelvises tilt as we move them. Like I'm seated on the floor, and if I stand, the position of my pelvis is going to tilt. So to me, there's a time that you want to hold it and a time that you want to move it. So both that mobility and stability are going to be important. And I do a lot less kind of quote unquote correction. I do still tend to though work in that neutral range, because if we don't have strength in neutral, you're not going to have strength at your desk. When you're tilted, you're not going to have strength anywhere. So I still kind of live and die by neutral pelvis. But if somebody comes in and their pelvis isn't neutral, unless they're coming out of something like bar class where they tucked everything and it's a habit to kind of just tuck in there, I just let it sort of iron itself out a little bit more naturally.
Interesting. Yeah. So of course, the body's not static, right? As we're moving around, sometimes it'll be one way, sometimes it'll be other. I think the problem is when it is kind of perpetually stuck in a certain position.
Totally.
From certain behavioral postures or posture behaviorals.
Agreed.
Whatever. I have an interesting question. It's a selfish personal one. So as I'm sitting at this desk right now or whenever, instead of just sitting in a chair, which is, that more so right angle for the legs and the pelvis, I always have a buckwheat cushion on the chair. So that elevates my glutes and obviously my hips from my knees. And then it's kind of like a different position. And I do that specifically to maintain better back and hips and glute health. Is that something that you think is a good idea for people, or has some caveats to it? What's that?
It can be. So generally I like that question because it's not the end of the question that I thought you were going to give me. So I think a couple things. Number one, I often will get asked questions about what do I do at my desk and how do I correct my posture? And I'm like, well, best of luck to try to keep that at top of mind while you're also typing out a project and finishing on a deadline. You're not going to do it. So I try to just reduce a bit of that fear where we can't be mindfully correcting our posture all day long. That's just not real. The question you just asked me about using props or tools, I like within the confines that everybody's structure is slightly different. So that was one thing that I really like out of my yin yoga training, founded by Paul Grilley. He really brought the concept that, if you actually look at my hip structure, your hip structure, other than being two different genders, and they're fundamentally different, the head of the femur, which is the top of your leg bone, is going to look different. So there's a different amount of curve and length of the neck. There's a different size of the head of the femur. the hole, the acetabulum that it fits into. Those come in different sizes. The biggest glaring difference typically between typical males and typical female bodies is the placement of those holes. So that's why we see women having wider pelvises versus, like, we tend to be a little bit more on the outside. Men's tend to be a little bit more forward. That kind of gives a narrower hip. Male hips and females, the bowl of the pelvis are actually shaped differently because, babies and whatnot. But those components are going to fundamentally change that answer. So for you, if that is doing something, keep doing it. Would I say everybody should do that? No, because all of those variables that I just named, I would have to personally, if I was going to like put my name on it and be like, good idea, I would actually want to just look at it with my eyeballs, because sometimes what can happen is we make a correction, it's helpful, and then we keep doing it and it actually takes us the other way. Or, you get somebody who's got a different shaped pelvis than you do, or the head of their femur is a different shape or length or angle. It actually might be jamming the femur up into the joint differently. So, broadly speaking, that's really where we dig back to what we were talking about before, where if you have that body awareness and you're like, okay, that actually opens my hip, it shifts my pelvis so that I'm kind of a little bit more forward, I'm sitting more in my hips, I can activate my abs a little bit more, my back is neutral, I'm not holding more tension there. Good prop, right? Versus if we're just like, what does TikTok say I should do? Well, I'm like, I don't know.
Yeah.
Because there's no awareness of what that's actually doing for you. So that's an answer / non-answer.
I love it though. I love it. That's the most responsible answer I think that you could have given for any type of practitioner to give for some of these types of questions, because there is no one answer. The answer most of the time for a lot of bodily things is it depends. I'd have to see it. I'd have to see you. I'd have to see the scenario and the interaction between the two. It might be something to consider, but it also might be something that's damaging. Like that's as real as it gets.
I know, and it's so annoying, but that's where pools of work like Pilates actually, that's how you arrive at that answer. Yeah. Because when you have that body awareness and you know what things feel like when they're kind of open and you know where your bones are sitting, then you can determine that for yourself. We do not fundamentally teach children how to do this. We don't teach adults how to do this. And even, and I'm not critiquing this, it may sound like I am, but I'm not. But, I have a lot of people in my practice or my life where like they get that answer because their workplace sent in kind of a consultant. But the consultant actually still isn't explaining like, feel your body. And the reason it's not a criticism is because I think those ergonomic assessments are very helpful. And it's somebody who is an expert and they can set up your workstation for you. But this missing component is still that disconnection from the body. So, I mean, ideally, I would actually work with somebody who had an ergonomic consultant that I could also work with. And then you get that combination because your body shifts with age, right? So I see people that are using tools or tricks or things like, well, the ergonomic consultant set this up 15 years ago. And it's like, well, you had a baby in the meantime and you changed your whole workout plan and like, okay. So that's really where it gets a bit sticky, is that we kind of see corrections or consultants or tools or things that shift or that somebody's using successfully for that moment in time, but then their body shifts. And then what? They still don't have that underlying information or body awareness or the functional skill set to actually know what to do next.
Yeah. And I love it. And that brings me to the second half of your response that I want to recognize, in that as a practitioner, sometimes you have to say, I don't know, figure it out.
Yes.
Figure it out.
Yes.
You have to know how you feel. You have to put in some effort to be consciously aware of what's going on in your body and what's going on kind of behind the scenes. Get a working comprehension of how your own body is working. And like, you can't do everything for people,
No, No, and I get that question a lot, especially in the first 3 sessions that I work with people. Am I doing this right? Am I doing this right? Am I doing this right? And
I don't know. You tell me.
Pretty much, yes. And so what you will get from me is, okay, I'm going to show you this on a skeleton. I'm going to tell you what bones and muscles are here. I'm going to explain something. And then you tell me. So I don't expect people who have no more education than they started with before they ask that question to come up with that answer. But they're missing a piece of information to be able to answer that themselves. And so then that's my job, is what is that piece of information that would help bridge that gap so that you could answer that yourself. So that's the key. It's not just like, hey, you should know. Whether they should or shouldn't, they don't. So the key to unlocking that door is, what is it that they aren't able to do? So if somebody doesn't know what a sensation is, if I say, oh, do you feel that in your glute? And they don't even know where their glute is. Well, then that's on me for okay, let's actually be specific about what region of the body we're talking about. Yeah. There's other scenarios where, that one I actually get most from people who've been on social media, and there's like things that trend on there, obviously. And so they'll bring in things that, and it shifts over the years, but there was a rotator cuff trend for a while. And then we're in the hip flexor times right now. And so people bring in these words, but they don't actually know what the muscles are, and they don't know what it means. So then I just kind of walk them through, okay, this is what it is. But there's other things like, they can't feel the sensation because they can't access sensation in that part of their body. So I will start by saying, okay, this is what I'm seeing where your body's going. I'll sometimes use tools. Like there was that client who just left, couldn't feel whether she was shifting her pelvis. So even when I was like explaining it from a biomechanics standpoint, so I got something and put it on that part of her body so that then she could feel, or sometimes it's their hands and they can put it there, feel something. Other times it is, they can't name it because they have no experience in ever saying these things or thinking them through. So again, it's like, okay, we're going to lay on the floor right now. And can you tell me what you feel in your body?
Yeah.
Some people can do that with ease, and other people, it takes like a few minutes. And of course it's like encouraging people, it feels longer. Great. What else do you notice? We feel like a little heat. And we start to develop that vocabulary. So there's different pieces of information that people are missing, and there's different tools or access doors that I've witnessed, both of myself and other people, that we can practice these skills. Some of it's literally information, some of it's a skill set. But there's always something between here and there. It's, am I doing it right is just the beginning of that, because we can't, as I said already, like we can't just expect that person to suddenly like pop into like, I know now. That's really where I'm a teacher, an educator, a facilitator of that knowledge, because that's what all my trainings have, they've helped me with a lot of those gap fillers and things from textbooks, as well as some of that experience. And then just the literal experience of doing this for as long as I have with as many people as I have, I can pretty much know instantly what we're missing so that I can pull those things in.
I love how comprehensive you are in answering questions, because again, you nailed all the different angles of why someone might struggle to even answer that. It's one, they don't have the knowledge or they don't have the vocabulary, or they don't have the experience. Perhaps they don't even have the ability to connect with a certain area of their body because that area is weak or posturally has an imbalance or what have you. So it's as long as there's, I suppose, the effort on the client's part to progress in these ways, then you can kind of, as a practitioner, successfully continue the agenda.
And then I would also say, actually, I loved what you said about they want to progress. Most people do. What I actually encounter more often is that they want instant results, and maybe not instant, because most people will be like, no, I know that it's going to take some time, but they are very trained towards that 21-day or 30-day quote unquote transformation concept. And so that can be really challenging for people, is that we don't go from, I've been sedentary at my desk for the last 27 years to like achieving, high level sports capacities. And so I think that, I was obviously offering some hyperbole there because it's funny, but really I do find people that want a level of results that's really rapid. And there are other trainers who can do that. And there are reasons why you would want to do that. Yeah. So I would want really rapid results, like cutting body fat, if I was competing in a bodybuilding competition. There's trainers on this planet who are like so good at that. That's awesome. I think where we run into trouble is just the idea that we, put in a few days of effort and then we're gonna get these like incredible TikTok worthy transformations. And most of my clients deny doing that, but I know that there's always a little bit of a frustrating period for people, where the first few sessions we get these like really dramatic growth curve on results. It's just the most incredible thing that's ever happened. You know what I mean? That growth curve flattens out, and then we're in frustrating zone. And I really try to talk people through that one too, because some of it is we have to actually work backwards. That can feel frustrating, but it's like we have to learn to write the letter A before we're writing a book. And they kind of just want to go from like a couple of weeks of learning to write the letters and then writing the book. They want to skip the let's write a word and let's write a sentence and then let's write a paragraph. Yeah. Absolutely. So it can be really tricky to just pull people back to like this whole process is a process.
Yeah. You nailed it. It's like a person might have gone 20, 30, 40, 50 years contributing to a current issue or imbalance. It might take a year or two or more to truly and functionally really correct that in a lasting way where it doesn't come back. And it might, people have to understand, healing isn't necessarily linear either. No, there's going to be waves and cycles and progression and then setback and then progression. And it's a dance that we do in trying to kind of correct our bodies, especially if we're trying to do it as expediently as possible after having so many years of contributory issues. I want to check in with you with time. We can, of course, wrap up, but if you have to go in like a minute because we are out of time, let me know. And I'll, or otherwise,
I have 30 minutes before I have a crisis.
Cool. Yeah. Cool. Healing takes time. And so your typical client or ones that you work with, what's the capacity in which you are working with them? Is it like hey, come in once a week until so-and-so problem is done and then leave? Are people working with you in an ongoing way just for maintenance? Like
good question.
What does working with you look like? And why?
I have kind of a couple of different things because again, I'm teaching private. So we're looking at a different model than a gym model where I'm a Pilates teacher and I'm coming in once a week. So I do have a body of people that come in once a week. Obviously I'm biased, or twice a week, whichever, but I'm a little bit biased towards, I think that is the best result because it's kind of a continuous process. So I have people that have done that as long as 10 or 11 years. I have people that have done that as short as they started last week. So then I have a set of people that is a rapid turn and we both know it. And that's a good thing. So they come in because they're like, I have sciatica, I have back pain, let's fix this up. And then we get you out of here. So those I love too, because it's like we're doing problem solving. I want to be efficient. I want to be effective. I want to be practical. I want to give them that knowledge so that, okay, this is what you're going to do if this comes back. So I have a client who I'm on session 4 with tomorrow. He came in because his feet hurt when he golfed and he had a history of sciatica. So we tackle those things. And then I will, he's going to do 5 altogether. And I really like the guy, but I will never see him again. And that's what we both want, right? It's like, great. You got a ton of information downloaded to you. You now know if your sciatica comes back, exactly what the process is, what's causing it in your body. You have exercises, you have homework, you have stuff to do. So those ones tend to be more like home-based things where you're going to get the exercises, you're going to get the tools, you're going to get the information, go do them. Right. That first group is people that were doing it together. They're doing it in my space. There's progressive, whatever. The third group of people are kind of what I call a hybrid. So often the most successful bit of that group are going to be people that have programs or activities, a high level of activity outside of my studio. So the example that I have given you already about the 72-year-old lady who's doing that other fitness program, she's a great example. So what her programming looks like with me is we're working on a long-term basis on what I call short-term problems. So she's getting all that education. She's getting all that information that the other two groups do, but we've spaced her out. So she comes in every 2 weeks because what we're able to do is go through, we do more like workshopping of a certain body area. So today we focused on abs. So let's really get into how we know if the abs are working, what it feels like when you've kind of stuff that your abs should be carrying is ending up in your neck and your shoulders. Let's draw your attention to this and that and the other thing. And then she's going out and doing her whole life and all of her workouts and all the things in between. When she comes back in, first thing we do is we check in, compare and contrast with where we were last time. Things have changed. Great. So we know that we don't have to go backwards. Now let's build that next kind of cube and brick. And so those clients tend to be medium term. Like they're not going to stay with me for 10 years, but it's not going to be 5 sessions either. So she'll probably be with me for a few months. But it fundamentally is going to shift. It already has, like how she thinks about movement. She's getting really that functional piece where it's like, again, she was kind of doing choreography before. And now I'm like, okay. Yeah. And as we go, she's getting it really. Cause I'm like, where do we think this exercise should be working in the body? And by this point, she knows. So then it's like, okay, let's really fine tune that for you. So I kind of have my short term, my medium term, and my long term clients, and they're programmed differently based on what their goal, their financial situation, their level of activity, things like that are. So it depends on why you're coming in the door and what you want on the other side. But it really also depends on your level of activity. Like, I mean, to be quite blunt about it, like if you have not been working out and you're not active, it's expecting anything to happen quickly is like trying to work one day of your life in a month and expecting to be wealthy, right? It's like, a lot of this just depends on what you're bringing in and what you're doing out there in terms of what those results and how long we're working together and what the programming looks like. Like I do have people that try to come in every 2 weeks, but they're not active. And I'm like, this is going to be a waste of your money. Like nothing's going to happen in those 2 weeks, even if you do your homework, if you're not active outside of here.
Yeah. And so the way that you kind of operate, I would presume, is someone just blanket comes in, you probably have some sort of intake form, you consult with them, figure out what they're doing, what they want to do, where they're at, and then you kind of categorize them into those different categories based on what has to get done.
Yes.
Like kind of.
Yes. So I'm not actually doing it by way of form. What I'm actually doing, so I have exactly one package that you can buy. The rest of them are just individual sessions. Every single human who comes into my space, whether it's digital or bricks and mortar, 3 sessions. So that 3 sessions gives us time to assess, have those lifestyle conversations, talk about what the problems are. And then it's uncommon that it would take me more than like into that middle session to actually be like, okay, this is what I recommend. Doesn't mean that somebody's going to do it. This is why. And you can tell, like, I comprehensively just talked about that for a while. Most of the time they do it because if they've already made an investment and part of that investment is like whatever led them to me in the first place, whether it's a podcast or an article or Google, they're seeking a solution. So, That's how we come up with it. I do phone consultations before working with anybody, but then it's 3 sessions because the work tends to be a little bit different. Like we're not just banging through choreography and trying to sweat. Right. So it can take me more than 1 hour to sort of come up with like, okay, because also like I can do things with people that they don't respond to the way that I think they're going to.
Yeah.
No matter how much experience you have, there's always an outlier where you're like, that didn't actually go the way that I wanted it to, or that it's just, that's not, there's some people that's actually in a positive direction. The results are way faster than I think they're going to be. And other people are slower, or there's none. But usually, somewhere in that middle of that second hour, I can kind of be like, okay, this is what I think is going to happen based on what I'm seeing.
Yeah. And so you mentioned it there, but you work virtually with people in addition to, of course, in person. Is it offering the same kind of services in both directions?
Yep.
Awesome.
Yeah. I was going to say there's no difference. There is a clear difference. But, I think like many practitioners, I got a very strong body of experience in 2020 and 2021 with virtual. And I have always laughed because I tried to really move people to virtual starting in 2018. And nobody knew how to like run Zoom. And I'm like, well, there was 1 week in March of 2020 that we all learned all together. So I have people that live locally that do virtual. They tend to be folks with like heavy travel schedules. I work with couples, and that can be actually great for couples because one person can be in one city and the other can be in another. I also have clients who do not live in Canada or anywhere near me. So the process is the same. I think what tends to shift is those work best for kind of those first 2 categories of people. So they tend to, unless there's some other reason, like what I just explained, they tend to be really great for those people looking for like those quicker term solutions, or for, I have an active lifestyle and I have a specific thing that I'm looking for. Because that growth curve is really strong, this is my personal experience. That growth curve is really strong in almost equivalent and identical ways for the first part, whether it's digital or in person. There does hit a point though, and it can change depending on the person, but when that flattens out, they're going to benefit from me being in person with them. So if it's somebody who's like, I want to work with you twice a week for the next 5 years, at some point, an in-person session would be helpful because some of those nuances just are not visible on a camera in the same way. So even that couple that I was talking about that do virtual, because they do live locally, they will come in every, 6 months or so. And it's just one session, but then we can kind of top that information up and away we go. So, yes, but if somebody came to me and was like, I have sciatic pain, like you're going to get the same result in my personal experience, having done it for a couple of years, virtual versus in person.
Yeah, that makes sense. It's like if you're working with someone in a long-term basis, at least seeing them in person occasionally, having that direct human to human interaction, that energy transfer, it just kind of helps the working relationship, alleviates maybe a bit of frustration, really just kind of keep the positive emotions going. And on the name of emotions, do you work through people's kind of emotions directly or either indirectly? Do you find their emotions sometimes come out of them through the exercise that you're doing? Like, do you address that side of healing at all, or do you stick to the physical side?
No, I don't. So the answer is yes. People's emotions come out when they're doing the physical work. Now, again, I'm working privately with people. So my background is blurry, but if it was not and you were on the video, you could see my studio behind me. So it's I don't think you can get a sense of that visually with the blur, but it's a few hundred square feet. So we're talking about, the size of like a large bedroom kind of idea. So it's a pretty intimate size space. And I did it on purpose because, I did come from kind of that older school Pilates model. And the first place I ever taught when I was doing my training, kind of looked like this. And so I wasn't trying to copy them, but I did. So where we get that kind of that small private training. And I really wanted to do that, because quite often the model that we're offering people, like even if you go into, you go into your big box gyms and you can pay for a personal trainer, but you're by no means having a private session with them. Yeah. Like you're doing customized workout. You are not alone in a room with that person. So it looks more like the experience that a massage therapist would have with a client, where you're working on them, except because my clients are active and definitely awake. I'm literally spending an hour, and we're not always talking about their body. So they're talking about, or I am, like what happened over the weekend with this and that and whatever. So, but what started as small talk, I noticed not that long into opening this business that people would have, I don't even know what the terminology is, but they would like end up crying on the floor and telling me about, difficult experiences either in the present, past, or distant past. And so I went to a therapist because I was like, well, like no one, so we called these exercises mind body exercises, but there's not a damn thing in this training that tells us what to do with the mind part of it. Like, that the solution for all of it, and I think really to this day, unless you're doing like a trauma module, is breath. Well, like, I'm not going to take a person who's crying on the floor and telling me about a sexual assault and tell them to breathe. Like, that's not it for me. Yeah. So the therapist, pointed me in a direction that I didn't actually take, but I took the broader message, which was that there was a field that we now, it's in the pop cultural, terminology now, but it's trauma work. Yeah. And I had a hard time kind of wrapping, like many of us do when we first encounter that word, like, what? I don't get it. But essentially, emotional experiences that reside in the body are trauma is kind of the link. So when we talk about mind body work, you cannot do mind body work, in my opinion, without actually some trauma training, because you have to know what to do with those emotions. You have to be able to help people with that, because it's just part of what we do. I think you would be pressed to find a massage therapist who doesn't relate to what I'm saying, because it happens. Like, you start to work people's body on that really structural, deeper level. You're doing body work with them. They're going to start having emotions, and it's not every day, and it's not all the time, and it's not every client, but it was happening so often that I was like, this is a pattern. It is not a one-off. It's not an accident. It's not a mistake. So I subsequently have 4 or 5 different trauma trainings. And just like the physical world, each of those kind of adds something different. In my work, I'm actually infusing several of those principles into absolutely everybody's programs, because they are things like attunement and choice and things like that everybody can benefit from. But I also, on the other end of the spectrum, can do, the next person who comes through my door has booked a session specifically for trauma work. So it is what we call a treatment-resistant client. It was a referral from a therapist. I also have I don't teach a lot of classes, but one class that I do teach is a pregnancy and infant loss center. So that we're working with like a more, traumatized population. So my work goes from, you're coming in because you want a stronger core and you don't want to have back pain at work, to literally on the other end of the spectrum. So for me, they are the same work. And it's the same work because the mind and the body are one thing. We can do 1 billion hours of therapy. And if we are sedentary all day long and we never move our body, we're not going to have good mental health. but vice versa. So we can move our body, we can go to the gym. History is rife with people with a lot of disordered body problems who work out, they're super in shape, they're, you get all the body perfections, and their brain is in like orthorexia, and other mental health problems. So, I think that those two things, obviously I just gave two really extreme examples, but it really illustrates the point. Like, this is all one thing. There is no such thing as one without the other, or the other without one.
Yeah, beautifully put. In this experience that we're all having collectively at the same time, but individually at our own levels, it's there's certainly no separation between the physical and the metaphysical, and I don't think it's it's impossible. It's not possible to ever achieve a separation. So, of course, if we try to treat in isolation, we are leaving out half of the equation. Like, you're just doing yourself a disservice if we're not tending to all the different fronts of our human existence when we're trying to figure out what's going on and optimize it. And so, Janis, there's so much to you. I'm continuing to learn more about the things that you do. And, if someone loved everything that you had to say here today, where could they find more of you? Are you posted on socials? What website can they go to? How can they contact
Well, if they loved
you?
everything and we've gotten to this point, first of all, I want to say thank you. I appreciate that. My website is kind of home base, if you will. It's my business name, which is My Body Couture. So that's 3 different words. First word is my, M-Y. Second word is body, B-O-D-Y. Third word is couture, like the French word, C-O-U-T-U-R-E. And if I was to rename my business, I wouldn't put a French word, but I live in Canada. I thought everybody knew the word. Anyways, so you can find me on the .com. And to make it really simple, basically, if I'm active on a social media site, just hit this / My Body Couture and see what comes up. But I'm not actually on TikTok, but you'll find me on Instagram, Threads, Facebook. Those are kind of my home bases. There's a few others. Pinterest is kicking out. I'm going to post this episode on Pinterest section. So you can obviously go visit the pages and kind of see what's there. But I'm really all about actual connection. So you can hit the follow button, but I'd love to get a message and just introduce yourself. Tell me how, if you listen to the episode, what did you got out of it? What questions do you have? Stuff like that. So I'm really about that one-to-one connection, even on the big social platforms. So I invite people to literally hop into my DMs and get at it.
Yeah, it's amazing to see someone so diverse in their healing practice. And it's interesting to hear your origin stories about how, you're just doing what you needed. And I think that's where the most beautiful experience for now your patients or clients can come from, and that what it's like to be on their side of things, and it's really amazing. I certainly thank you for the work that you're doing. And
thank you.
I'd love to know if there's any particular closing message that you'd really like to leave our guests off with, something that sticks with them. They can, think about it tonight when they go to sleep. This one last thing that you want installed in their minds. What would that last thing be?
Practice, 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 and you're never getting to perfect. But I think when it comes to the body and the mind, we have to be here. We have to be here now. And the only way to do that is to just, you have to practice. So there isn't such a thing. It's a bummer actually with our body, but there's no such thing as filling up that bank account and then just leaving it to collect interest. You have to do the thing every day, every week, every month, every year of your life. And if you still haven't started, there's great research that shows that the body's very forgiving. And basically anytime between 20 and 65 or so, if you start, the net result is actually pretty close to the same. So it's actually like the opposite of money, where with money, you want to start early and you can build up a pot and leave it. With our body, I mean, the ideal is that everybody's been doing it all along. But if you wait, you can still build that pot up. But the problem is you can never just walk away from it. So you still have to continue to invest in that. And it doesn't have to be miserable, but just kind of wrapping your head around the fact that you probably have to do something and you can't outsource it and you can't leave it and you can't let it go, or otherwise you do pay it back with interest at some point. So really just get into that practice mindset and you'll be golden.
A message of empowerment, but also accountability.
Yes.
There's no reason not to start now. There's no reason that it's ever too late. You can do something to get in a better place than you are right now. That's beautiful. Very beautiful. Janis, thank you very much for coming on the show.
Thank you.
A big thank you to Janis for coming on the show. Super cool, very knowledgeable about her craft, and someone that seems to be doing the art of Pilates a true honor. I love connecting with practitioners of different varieties that undo the whitewashing that's been all too common for different healing modalities and healing arts. And Janis is certainly a wonderful example of that for Pilates. Who knew that the little classes that you see in the gym actually stem from healing that took place for soldiers in a battlefield? That's very fascinating. I have not, before this conversation with Janis, dove into the wonderful world of Pilates, but it certainly sounds like something I'm more open to now after speaking with her, and hopefully I'd be so lucky to find a practitioner near me that was knowledgeable to the extent that she is. Wonderful. Again, big thank you to coming on the show. I appreciate her patience through our technical difficulties, and I'm really happy with the episode and the way it turned out. Be sure to check out her website and her company, My Body Couture. As always, be sure to check out ZachTheHealthKing.com to check out everything I'm up to. Please make sure that you're subscribed to the channel so you get notified whenever I put out a new episode. I do intend to get them out sooner than I have been, but life gets busy. And beatcancer.org has been having a lot of my attention lately and all the wonderful things that we're doing there. So be sure to check out beatcancer.org as well for all of our holistic cancer educational programs, no matter where you might be on a cancer journey. We have information and educational programs to get you the help that you need to not face it alone and not have to suffer the consequences of cancer or of certain cancer treatments that aren't so pleasant. Thank you very much for tuning in. You're listening to the Health King's Court. Ancient wisdom, modern health.